This meeting is now being recorded. Good evening and welcome to the Connecticut Department of Transportation's Public Information Meeting for State Project 171-440. This project is a signing project that will install horizontal curve warning signs at approximately 830 curves on state roads across 36 municipalities in central Connecticut. Tonight, we'll be presenting the findings and recommendations for curve signing at curves on state roads only in the town of Coventry. My name is Ryan Pothering, and I'm the project engineer at the Connecticut Department of Transportation for this project. I want to thank everyone for taking the time to join us. We hope our presentation will be informative, and we hope to answer your questions and concerns during tonight's question and answer session. By the end of tonight's meeting, we hope that you have a better understanding of the process of determining appropriate signage at curve locations across the state and the signing impacts at curves on the state roads in Coventry. If you are viewing this presentation in Microsoft Teams, you have the option to view captions or subtitles for this presentation. To turn on this feature, select the CC button at the bottom right corner of your screen to turn on the captioning. Then choose the language by selecting the settings wheel next to the CC button, select Captions/Subtitles, and select the desired language. Available languages for this presentation are English and Spanish. Before we start the presentation, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items and explain the format for tonight's meeting. Our presentation will last approximately 30 minutes, and once it is completed, we will host a live question and answer session. You'll have 3 ways of communicating with us during the live Q&A. You can send an email to dotproject171-440@ct.gov, leave a voicemail message at 860-944-1111, or you can type your question directly into the live event Q&A in Microsoft Teams. You can ask a question by first clicking on the little question mark, which will bring up your live Q&A field. Select the Ask a Question button in the bottom right screen, and a field will pop up where you can type your question. And then you hit enter or the little arrow button to submit your question to the project team. You can also check the box at the bottom of the screen to post your question anonymously if you prefer. With all 3 of these methods, there will be a slight delay, but eventually your question will appear in the featured section with all the other questions asked tonight. We also have a project webpage where a recording of tonight's entire presentation, including the live Q&A, will be stored. The webpage will also contain the same information that I've previously explained on how to provide comments or ask questions. The webpage address is portal.ct.gov/DOT Coventry 171-440. The comment period will open through January 28th, 2021 via either email or telephone as shown on the screen. The Microsoft Teams chat function will only be available during tonight's live Q&A session. Lastly, we would greatly appreciate it if you can fill out a very brief feedback survey the department has through SurveyMonkey. Virtual public information meetings are a new and necessary development for the department during these times, and the survey will help the department improve these public meetings going forward. The web address is www.surveymonkey.com/r/V8Z-Q. There is also a civil rights flyer that is available. The website is portal.ct.gov/dot/business/contract-compliance/civil-rights-and-accessibility. Finally, I would like to reinforce that no person shall, on the basis of race, color, or national origin, be excluded from participation or subject to discrimination in the development of this project. I would now like to introduce those from the department who are participating in this meeting. Joe Ouellette is the State Safety Engineer for the state of Connecticut and head of the Safety Engineering Unit in the department's Division of Traffic Engineering and is the project manager for this project. Once again, I'm Ryan Pothering, an engineer in the Safety Engineering Unit and the lead engineer for this project and primary presenter for tonight's meeting. I will also be answering any questions you may have during the live Q&A session. Alejandro Brito is also an engineer with the Safety Engineering Unit and presenter for tonight's meeting. He'll be reading off any questions that come in during the presentation and the live Q&A, so I can answer them for you. Balaj Martai and Romain Camara are also engineers with us in the Safety Engineering Unit and will be monitoring the Teams chat, project email address, and call-in voicemail for any questions or comments during the live Q&A. And now I would like to introduce Mr. John Alcesser, the town manager of Coventry, to say a few words on behalf of the town of Coventry and their involvement with the department for this project and this meeting. John?
Good evening. Thank you very much for this presentation tonight. I just wanted to say that the Coventry Town Council did want this opportunity for the people to learn more about the safety project and the impacts of it. So we're very pleased that you're presenting this, and we'll be taking feedback from our public. So again, thank you for the time you spent in putting this presentation together.
Yeah, thank you, John, for being able to come and say a few words too on the town's behalf. So
appreciate the opportunity and look forward to the presentation.
Yep, sounds good. And so with that, I'd say let's get to the agenda for tonight's presentation. We will first go over the history of crashes in Connecticut and Coventry over the past 3 years, from 2017 to 2019, as well as the history of crashes on curves over that same time period. Then we will go over the safety benefits of curve signage, as well as the criteria for determining how many signs a curve should receive. We'll also cover how we selected certain curve locations to review under this project. Next, we will review all of the curve locations in Coventry that we identified for our task-based consultant to perform engineering studies in order to determine whether or not curve signing was warranted. Then we'll take a look over the timeline for this project so you have an idea of when to expect signs to be installed during construction before we wrap everything up with the live Q&A discussion and the evening. All right, now bear with me as I get through this next slide because I'm going to be throwing out a lot of numbers and statistics, but this helps paint the picture of why we initiated this project in the first place. I'll also be referring to state and town-owned roads throughout this slide, so when I refer to either, I'm talking about who has the primary jurisdiction over the installation or removal of infrastructure in the roadway, be it signs, traffic signals, catch basins, pavement markings, etc., etc. So in any given town, the Connecticut Department of Transportation has jurisdiction over all state roads, which have a numerical designation along with a street name, such as Route 6, Route 217, I-95, and I-384, for example. All the other roads, the town would have jurisdiction over the installation or removal of the infrastructure. For Coventry, examples of these town-owned roads would be Brigham Tavern Road, Cedar Swamp Road, or Grant Hill Road. And this project is only going to be focusing on curves along the state roads. So between 2017 to 2019, nearly 343,000 crashes occurred across all roads in Connecticut. Of these crashes, a little over a tenth of them occurred at curves. And about a quarter of all these crashes in Connecticut resulted in either an injury or a fatality. And again, a little over a tenth of these crashes occurred at curbs. When we take a look at fatal crashes, however, we see that they only represent about less than 1% of all crashes in Connecticut, yet a third of all fatal crashes occur at curves. So there is a real need to address curve-related crashes just because of how they contribute to the total number of fatal crashes in the state. Also to give you an idea of these curve crashes on state roads in Connecticut, they represent 57% of all curve crashes, 58% of all fatality and injury related curve crashes, and 66% of all fatal curve crashes. So there is also a need to specifically address curve crashes on state roads. In fact, all states are required by the federal government to provide appropriate signage at horizontal curves to proactively attempt to reduce crashes on all roads. And what we mean by like a proactive attempt, we mean to provide signs at a curve where we think a crash may occur based on various risk factors. We don't want to wait for a crash to occur at that curve before we provide signage. We really want to prevent the crash before it happens. And as a result, the department has developed 4 projects to address horizontal curve signing on state roads across the entire state. 2 of them are currently under construction in western and southwestern Connecticut, and this project is currently under the design phase, along with 1 other curve signing project. Now, let's take a look at all of the horizontal curve crashes on state roads in Coventry from 2017 to 2019. Thankfully, there's not that many. Only 43 crashes occurred. Now, for those of you who can see the presentation, these next 3 slides will show 3 snapshots of a year's worth of crashes at curves on state roads in Coventry. Now, each one of these red dots that you see on the map represents 1 crash in that year. And the larger and larger the dot or heat splotch is on the map, means that there's more crashes that have occurred at that location. So this is also just a great way for us to identify hotspot locations that need immediate attention. In 2017, in Coventry, 10 crashes occurred at curves on state roads, and 4 of those crashes resulted in an injury. Now, I'd like for you to keep an eye out on one of those crash locations as I go through the next 2 years of crash maps. So I'm going to change the slides in 3, 2, 1, and here's the map for 2018. There's 15 crashes total, 4 of which resulted in an injury. For some of you, your dot from 2017 may have stayed in the same place, while others have had their dot disappear, and that's okay. I want you to keep staring at the spot that you chose in 2017 as I move from the 2018 crash map to the 2019 crash map. Okay, we're going to change slides in 3, 2, 1, and here we go. So for 2019, we had 18 crashes that occurred at curves on state roads in Coventry, 5 of which resulted in an injury. And as you might have noticed, as we move from slide to slide, the locations of the crashes are generally moving around the map. There are a couple of consistent hotspot locations in Coventry, but the majority of crashes are occurring randomly. And that random crash pattern is due in part to really driver error and not necessarily the geometry of the roadway. In fact, 93% of all crashes can be attributed to human error in some way, be it driver distraction with looking at the cell phone or some other sort of distraction, aggressive driving and speeding, young and inexperienced drivers, and also impaired drivers. And the main goal of providing signs at these curves is so we can refocus a driver's attention back onto the roadway and potentially preventing another crash from occurring. So the primary reason we prefer to install signs first at a location is because we already know that the enhanced delineation of curves is already a Federal Highway Administration proven safety countermeasure, which is a treatment or strategy that has been research proven to reduce serious injuries and fatalities when implemented on roadways. Numerous studies have already concluded that just by installing chevrons and curve warning signs at a curve location can reduce crashes from anywhere between 30 to 50%. And so the first step in this project is for us to identify all the curve locations in Connecticut that may benefit from curve signing. So we're going to be taking a more proactive approach than a reactive approach, where the reactive approach would be signing curves where crashes have already started occurring. So we don't want to do that. And so as part of this proactive approach is we just identify risk factors at each curve location in Connecticut that, if they're present, would increase the likelihood of a crash occurring there. So think of it as essentially we're just giving our curves a physical and assessing what kind of treatments are needed to lower the risk of something bad, such as a crash, from happening there, based off of the risk factors that we identify at these locations. And so the primary risk factors that we looked at are the advisory speed, which is a recommended speed for a vehicle should travel to safely navigate a curve during dry pavement conditions. So this takes into account the curve geometry or the curve sharpness. And the larger the difference between the advisory speed and the speed limit indicates the need for more signs. So what we do first is we just kind of calculate what a predicted advisory speed for that curve would be to see if it would be a viable location, and then we'll discuss in how we measure the actual advisory speed a little bit later. The next risk factor that we took a look at is whether or not there's a presence of an intersection at the curve, just because it would be helpful to inform the driver to be watchful for any potential vehicles turning into or out from a side street. And then the last risk factor that we took a look at is whether or not the crest of a hill is present, so that just to inform drivers that in advance that there is a turn in the road that they cannot see because of the crest of that curve. So once we have identified curve locations based off of these risk factors, we recognize that they might benefit from potential treatment. We're not sure yet. So what we do is we hired a consultant to travel to each of these curve locations to perform an engineering study. And this engineering study involves 2 engineers in a car traveling along the curve at various speeds. One engineer is responsible for driving along the curve at different speeds in 5-mile-an-hour increments, while the other engineer is reading a device called a ball bank indicator as the vehicle is traveling along the curve. And that engineer takes those ball bank indicator measurements and compares them to one of our traffic engineering standards called the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices to determine what the actual advisory speed is for that curve. And so when we know what the actual advisory speed is, we can then determine what signs, if appropriate, if any really, are appropriate for the curve. So if signs are warranted at a curve location, the type of sign and the number of signs is determined by that difference between the advisory speed and the posted speed limit. So if the advisory speed is at least 5 miles an hour below the posted speed limit, then we will typically just recommend just an advanced curve warning sign before the beginning of the curve. If there's more than one curve location within 600 feet of another curve, then we might recommend a reverse turn or a reverse curve sign, or if there's a bunch of curves, like just within one stretch of roadway, we might just even recommend a winding road sign. That way we don't have to put, curve warning signs at each and every individual curve location. We can kind of consolidate them all into one series. And so, but also if there's a side streets present on the curve, we would also need to note that on the sign as well. Now, if the advisory speed is at least 10 miles an hour below the posted speed limit, we will also install an advisory speed plaque below that curve warning sign to notify motorists what the advisory speed of the curve is, so we can encourage them to slow down in order to safely navigate the curve. And to enhance this recommendation, we would also install a series of chevrons along the curve in each direction. Now, if the curve isn't very long, or if there are complications with installing a series of chevrons along a given curve location, but chevrons are warranted, then we would install just one of these guys right here. They're called one direction large arrows, and we would just install one of these arrows along each direction of travel towards the curve. We also just like to call these signs ODLAs for short. Chevrons and ODLAs both make the curve more apparent to approaching vehicles. And so when we install chevrons or ODLAs at a curve, we will also attach a retroreflective strip, which is just a strip of retroreflective sheeting that is applied to the post of a sign to make those signs even more visible to approaching traffic, especially at night. And so these are all just a sample of all the different signs our consultant must consider when the measured advisory speed is low enough that signs are warranted at a curve location. But another consideration that our consultant has to take a look at is if signs are warranted at a curve at all. And so we have criteria for that too. So during these engineering studies, our consultant took a look at the following factors to determine if signing was not warranted at a curve. That's if there's two factors that we took a look at. The first one is if the curve is located within or in close proximity to a traffic signal or stop sign, as they would have more of an effect on how motorists would select their travel speed than the curve itself, especially because these locations usually have warning signs before the traffic signal or the stop sign to warn the motorists that they need to slow down or stop when they get to that intersection. The second criteria is if the measured advisory speed is greater than or equal to the posted speed limit, and there are no intersecting streets or hill crests present along the curve. The picture of the curve above is a perfect example of a curve where signing isn't warranted. When our consultants went out there, they measured the advisory speed, saw that it was equal to the speed limit. They noticed that there weren't any intersecting streets along the curve, and the curve was clearly visible in each direction as there wasn't any hills to obstruct visibility of the curve. So if our consultant determined signs were not warranted at a particular curve location, then that curve fell into one of two categories. There were a curve where no signs currently exist, which in that case, we're just going to leave that curve as is. We're not going to do anything there, so we're just going to remove the curve from the project entirely. And then there are those curves where they have existing signs there that are already present, like the example above. And in that case, what the consultant will do is they'll provide aerial images of the curve itself and showing where each of these existing signs are located. So then we'll take those aerial images and send it to the Department of Transportation's Office of Maintenance. So state maintenance crews can go out to each of these curve locations and remove the unwarranted signs. So once the consultant has reviewed all the curves like along a given route, they'll prepare design plans for all the curves that will receive signs in Coventry, and then those aerial images of all the curves where the existing signs will be removed. And then once that's done, they'll send the design plans and that list of curve removal locations to the department for us to review. And then once we have received all of the design plans for curves in a particular town, we will send those design plans and those aerial images out to the town for them to review as well, to provide their own comments to see if whether or not some signs would be necessary to include or exclude, and if the signs are placed in a proper location, just to kind of double check to see we're not installing a sign in the middle of someone's front lawn. And we did exactly that for Coventry as well. On August 27th, 2020, I sent the preliminary design plans that we had and the list of sign removal locations to town manager and the public works director, Todd Penny, for them to review. And then I received their comments on October 7th of 2020. And so the design plans that are provided in those presentation display materials on this project's webpage has comments from the town that we will ultimately send to our consultant for them to incorporate into the final design plan. All right, now we've covered all the background to the project and the methodology for determining signs at these curve locations. Let's take a look at all the curve locations that we reviewed in Coventry. So across the 36 towns involved in this project, we identified approximately 1,700 curve locations for our consultant to review through that risk factor screening process. And of those 1,700 curve locations, we're only looking at 27 curves in Coventry. And here they are on the map. Each of the curves that you see with those yellow pinpoints have been given an ID number to designate which category they belong to. Curve locations where the signs are warranted, curve locations where the signs are not warranted and all the existing signs are going to be removed by maintenance, or those curve locations where signs are not warranted, but we're not doing anything there because no action needs to be taken at those curves. So we're going to go through each of these categories as they relate to Coventry. So of the 27 curves we reviewed in Coventry, we identified 15 where signing is warranted. So during construction for this project, our contractor will be installing the new signs at these 15 curves and remove any existing signs that are currently present there. At 2 curves on Route 6, we'll be installing 14 signs and 20 retroreflective strips and removing a total of 15 signs and 11 retroreflective strips. One of those curve locations, curve 6-2 in the lower right corner of the map, is going to be signed under another curve signing project, State Project 172-477, which will begin construction in spring 2023. Along 7 curves on Route 31, we'll be installing a total of 22 signs and 8 retroreflective strips and removing 11 signs and 0 retroreflective strips. At 3 curves on Route 44, we'll be installing a total of 6 signs, 0 retroreflective strips, and removing 5 signs and 0 retroreflective strips. One of the curve locations, 44-11 on the left side of the map, it currently does not have a design plan available, but we're recommending one just because we noticed that there is a crest curve, or the crest of a hill is present at that location. So our consultant's going to be preparing the plans for that location. And the next, at 1 curve on Route 195, we're going to be installing 2 signs and 0 retroreflective strips and removing 3 signs and no retroreflective strips. And then finally, at 2 curves on Route 275, we're going to be installing a total of 4 signs and 0 retroreflective strips and removing 5 signs and 0 retroreflective strips. So overall, during the construction of this project, we'll be installing 48 signs and 28 retroreflective strips, and then we'll be removing a total of 39 signs and 11 retroreflective strips across these 15 curves. Now let's take a look at the curve locations where signing is not warranted, and we'll have state maintenance forces remove the existing signs that are present there. Our consultant identified 8 curves in Coventry where existing signage is not warranted and should be removed. We identified 1 curve on Route 6 that will have 8 signs and 8 retroreflective strips removed, 3 curves on Route 31 that will have 9 signs and 0 retroreflective strips removed, 3 curves on Route 44 will have 5 signs and 0 retroreflective strips removed, and then 1 curve on Route 275 that will have 2 signs and 0 retroreflective strips removed. Overall, we're going to be removing 24 signs and 8 retroreflective strips across these 8 curves. Then finally, our consultant identified 4 curves where no signs were warranted and there are no existing signs to remove, so no action will be taken at these locations. So now let's tie everything together and take a look at the 23 curves in Coventry that is going to receive either construction or maintenance work. Collectively, we'll be installing 48 signs and 28 retroreflective strips, and we will be removing 63 signs and 19 retroreflective strips for an overall net decrease of 15 signs, or 24% decrease, and an overall net increase of 9 retroreflective strips, or a 50% increase. And as shown by the increase of retroreflective strips to be installed as part of this project, that means we'll be adding more chevrons and one direction large arrows to the curve locations where its geometry recommends additional signage in order to bring driver's attention to the curve. So we're taking some of the signs essentially from existing curve locations and putting them to the curve locations that need the most attention. The majority of this signing work will be along Route 31 with 10 curves, and Route 44 at 6 curves. Before we kick things over to the live Q&A session, I'll briefly talk about the project schedule just to give you a sense of where we're going forward in the project. Right now, we're expected to finalize all of our design plans and construction documents at the end of May of this year. Then we'll advertise the project out to contractors for its construction in August. Once a contractor has been selected, we're expecting construction to begin in spring of 2022 and end at around fall 2023. The duration for this project construction is based off of the approximately 830 curves that are receiving signs across all of central Connecticut under this project, not just the 15 curves in Coventry. As for when to expect to see construction taking place in Coventry, that's really going to be depending on how our contractor and the department's Office of Construction schedule when and where to install signs throughout the duration of the project. So it really can be any time between spring 2022 and fall 2023. DOT maintenance's sign removals, though, will happen independently from construction, so you may notice some signs having been removed before construction even begins. And then lastly, the total construction cost for this project is going to be around $3 million across the 36 towns in central Connecticut, which this includes costs for sign installation, sign removals, police control, any clearing and thinning, contractor mobilization, and other items in this project. And because this is a safety project, construction for this was eligible for 100% federal funding. So none of the construction for this project is actually coming from municipal or state monies. And with that, I want to thank you all for your time to listen to our presentation. And now it's time to hear from you in our live question and answer session. Remember, you may email us any questions or comments via the project email address, leave a voicemail message on the call and phone line, or send your questions directly via Microsoft Teams chat. We also want to encourage that you take our very brief feedback survey to help us improve how we deliver these virtual public information meetings in the future. So with that, Alejandro, do we have any questions from the email, voicemail, or chat for us to answer?
Hi, everybody. This is Alejandro speaking. Thank you, Ryan, for that wonderful presentation. And it looks like we already have a couple of questions.
All right.
First question asks, how does the roadway lighting influence the need for curve signs?
So the lack of illumination, it can be a risk factor, just because it would be helpful to have some visibility of the curve itself, but depending on where it is, if you're out on a rural road, that might not be available. It can be considered as a risk factor. It was not considered as one for this project because ultimately the main essentially constraint would be just really the geometry of the curve itself, which ties back into calculating that advisory speed and seeing what that is based off of the posted speed limit. So lack of illumination, it can be a consideration, but for this project, we just took a look at that, the advisory speed, the presence of an intersection, and the presence of a hill crest. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. And we have another question over here. Are there any environmental impacts within installing all of these signs, these 830 curves?
No, there aren't any. There aren't any environmental impacts with installing these signs. Sign installation is actually, there's the only real environmental impact per se is as part of our environmental review process that we get during any of this for any of these signing projects is really more kind of a visibility impact with regarding historic properties and scenic roads. So usually once we get our environmental reviews back, we usually get a list of curve locations in the project that are near historic properties. So we take a look at the signing plans to see where we can adjust designs within those federal regulations and standards in such a way that we aren't actually, there's not a bunch of signs in front of a historic house or kind of ruining the visibility of a scenic road. So we do take those into considerations, but any other kind of environmental impacts, there's not really any associated with sign installation.
Thank you for that answer. And we have another one here. Have any other town this project requested a public information? And if so, what has been the feedback from that you received?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question again, Alejandro?
Yeah. So somebody wants to know, has any other town during this project requested a public information? I'm assuming they mean a meeting. And if so, what has been the feedback that you received?
Usually, so there hasn't been any other public information meetings for this project, but for the other two signing projects that are currently under construction, we did have public information meetings, and most of it was really just kind of concerned about they just want to know how many signs were being installed, how many are removed. So we just go tell them, and in some locations actually it was kind of ties back into those environmental impacts, talking about like how many signs are you putting along the scenic road. And so we came in, we showed all the this is back when you could actually do public information meetings in public with physical people there, where we would have the plans out, we'd throw the slides up, and we could just show like where certain concerned locations are, and just telling them to let them know, like, these are how many signs that are getting installed along the scenic route, and then these are the ones that we are removing along this route. So yeah, that's usually the feedback, and usually get positive feedback, because they know, like, they understand that we are trying to we're trying to balance essentially like the aesthetics of the roadway with our need to provide safety on the roadway, particularly because these signs really aren't they're really not intended for the residents of the town itself. It's really more for those who are unfamiliar with the roadways, or who aren't really who are essentially just traveling through the town. They don't really know how the geometry of the roadway is.
Thank you for that answer. And talking about feedback, it's a good opportunity to remind everybody that we do have a brief survey. And for anybody watching on YouTube, if you see under the video, there should be see more, and if you click on it, there should be a hyperlink that brings you right into the survey. And it seems like we do have another question. So why does it take so long to install the signs?
So for that duration of it, it's really just because of the sheer number of locations that we have. I mean, if it was just 10 locations, a contractor could probably do that, within a week. But we are doing 830 curve locations, and it's all across 36 towns. So the contractor is just going to have to drive to each of the towns. They have to schedule out which routes that they're doing at certain times. And in some of these locations, a good number of the locations are actually going to be on the ramps on interstates. So 91, 84, 291, 384, 691, those are some of the interstates in this project. Most of the curves that are actually being installed in this project are going to be, or the signs that are going to be installed are actually going to be installed on the off ramps of curves, to let motorists know that they really need to start slowing down as they're getting off the interstate, so they don't, so we don't have them flying off the curve as they're exiting. So those signs are there to provide enhanced warning of the curves. And then another reason too is we do have a winter shutdown period goes from November through March. And so in some cases, the ground is just going to be too frozen for us to actually put the signs in, so we can't do any work at certain locations. So that's mainly the reason why it usually takes long for these size the size of these kind of projects.
Thank you, Ryan. And we have another question here. Why do you prefer the use of signs when you can just redesign the roadway to eliminate the curve altogether?
Well, that is so that one there, that is definitely a possible option. We usually like to prefer to use signs first, just because of how inexpensive it is to install a sign into a location, and it just, as I said, they're pretty cost effective when it comes to the amounts of crashes that can be reduced. So that's usually like I would say like the first line of defense when it comes to trying to reduce crashes at a curve. Redesigning the curve is definitely what we consider like the last option. Like that's probably going to be the only way we can eliminate the crashes. And the main reason for that is because it's a lot more expensive to redesign the curve, because it's going to take into consideration have highway design, like just planning out like where the road is going to go to eliminate the curve. And that itself might have some environmental impacts with excavation. There might need to be utility relocations, or different types of utilities to be reinstalled and reevaluated. And then also there could be rights-of-way issues with adjacent properties.
Thank you. And another question I posted, if the town doesn't like the signs after they're installed, can they remove them?
So for this project, because it's on the state road, we do own that part of the roadway, so we do own the signs. The town can definitely come to us through their local traffic authority to say like if there's like any kind of complaints about a sign, but we'll take a look at it. But generally, they cannot remove the signs on a state road. They do have the ownership of any signs on town owned roadways. But for us, I mean, because of we reviewed these curves under engineering studies with supporting evidence to have these signs there for this project, like we would like to keep the signs where they are.
Thank you. And I want to take the opportunity to remind everybody on YouTube or anybody who's on the phone, there are multiple ways to ask questions. You can always send us an email, give us a phone call, and if you're on YouTube, below the video, if you click I see more, there should be more information, including the email address, which is not hyperlinked, so you can always copy and paste it into your email, as well as a link to the website where you could see more information on the project, including the plans. And it seems like we have another question. Will lanes be closed during the installation of the signs?
We're not expecting any lanes to be closed during the construction of this. Primarily, like there might be some traffic control in the area that you'll have to be aware of. Usually it's either just going to be the contractor, like the construction crew, or in some other towns it might be local police, or in those ramp locations, state police. But we're not expecting to close lanes as part of the construction of this project, just because all of the work is going to be in the shoulder or just like off the edge of the roadway, so the contractor can put in you'd be able to see the traffic cones and the construction truck as these signs are being installed. So we're not anticipating any lanes to be closed during construction of this project.
Thank you for that answer. And I also want to remind the audience that we are accepting questions up to the 28th, and we could receive those questions either by you guys leaving a voicemail or sending an email. And anybody on the live chat, you can always ask the question at this moment, but once the live is closed, then questions can no longer be posted here. So feel free to send out an email or call the phone number. And the same goes for anybody on YouTube. There's multiple ways to ask questions.
Yep. Do we have any more that has come in?
Not at this moment.
Okay.
This way, maybe people are typing questions in.
Yep. That was a pretty good discussion. Like these are good questions. So
Yeah, I like the feedback question too, because we have that survey, brief survey that everybody could fill out and basically give us the feedback. So next
yeah,
time we have a meeting, we could come back with an answer.
I think it was just a good segue for you to just set up that segue into the feedback survey.
Yeah.
Maybe give it like maybe 1 or 2 minutes. If there's nothing else, then I'd say we could. If another question comes in, then we can.
Like there's one more.
Actually,
Yep.
yeah, it seems like a few more came in actually.
Okay.
How much money will this project cost to the state or the town?
This is definitely a question that has come up in the previous public information meetings for the other projects. Because this is a safety this is a safety project, and it is it's an encouragement and requirement from the federal government for us to sign these horizontal curves. This is eligible for 100% federal funding, so there is going to be no state monies or municipal monies towards the construction of this project.
Thank you, Ryan. And we have also provided the link to the survey on the chat. So if anybody wants to take a look at the survey and fill it out, just click on the hyperlink. Thank you all for joining us this evening. I want to remind everybody that the comment period is until the 28th. Question can be sent to us via email at dotproject171-440@ct.gov or by phone number at 860-944-1111. Please visit our website, portal.ct.gov/DOT Coventry 171-440. And in that website, you can find a copy of the presentation, which will be uploaded at a later time. You can see copies of the plans, a link to the brief survey, and I do encourage everybody to fill it out. Let your friends know or your neighbors who might not have the opportunity to watch the presentation live. They could always go into the website and see us and find out how to reach us. Thank you once again for your time and enjoy the rest of your night.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.